How many sig figs are there in a number? Sometimes this is made much more complicated than it needs to be. So let's see if we can't simplify it a little bit. How many sig figs are there in a number? If we look at a simple number like 12.5 grams, that's a measured number, so we need to worry about sig figs. We weighed something and said it contained 12.5 grams. Now there's 1, 2, 3 significant figures. All of these numbers, the 1, the 2, and the 5, are all part of the measurement. So that's pretty simple. 10.0 grams would be the same thing. We measured it to the nearest 10 grams, we measured it to the nearest gram, and we measured it to the nearest tenth of a gram. All three of those are significant. So we can say we have 3 sig figs in both of those measurements. Now, what about this one? 0.0609 grams. How many sig figs do we have here? If we look at this, we see some zeros out in the front. They're very important. And there's a little bit of a problem with the word significant. I don't really like the choice of the word significant for this because people confuse it with important. In normal life, significant means important. But in significant figures, significant means part of the measurement and part of the certainty of the measurement. These are important, but they are not, these zeros in front, they are not significant. In this case, they're important because they tell us where the decimal is. But we could rewrite this in scientific notation as 6.09 times 10 to the minus 2 grams, and you notice that those zeros in front disappeared. If zeros disappear when you write it in scientific notation, they are not significant. They're not part of the measurement. The 6, the 0, and the 9 are part of the measurement, but the zeros in front only were there to tell us where the decimal was. And since we're now in scientific notation, we don't need them to do that anymore, and so they just go bye-bye. So, zeros in front are never significant. And that's really important, okay? All the other zeros normally are. It's obvious when we go back up to the second thing that we did with the 10.0 grams that those zeros are significant. They were part of the measurement. Kind of a rule that we've come up with is to say if there's a decimal anywhere in the number, zeros are significant as long as they're not out front. So let's look at that. 502 milliliters. Well, the 0 is part of the measurement. It's not 512, it's not 592, it's 502. How about this one? 500 milliliters. Now we've got a problem. Is this to the nearest 100 milliliters, or is this to the nearest milliliter? The zeros, we could say that these zeros are here only to show us where the decimal point is. If we would rewrite this like this with a decimal point showing that there. Ooh, now we know that we have measured it to the nearest milliliter. This is kind of picky stuff here. But this is a way that people have devised to try and differentiate between 500 to the nearest 100. This would be this number right here, to the nearest 100. Maybe you measured it in a beaker. Beakers are not very accurate. Or this one was measured to the nearest milliliter. The nearest 100 milliliters, I should say, over there. Okay, so the nearest milliliter. So the decimal here clues us in that it's measured to the nearest milliliter. Now, chemists are kind of bad about forgetting to put this decimal in when you say 500 milliliters, and they just pay attention to how was it measured. Well, okay, did somebody just slop it into a beaker and get close to a number because beakers aren't accurate? Then they would know not to count it as 3 sig figs. But here, with this one, with the decimal, we know that there's 3 sig figs. So what we're going to do in this class is pretty much just assume that all zeros are significant unless they're in the front, like 0.0042. In the front, those are not significant. And we would have 2 sig figs here. We're going to use our common sense a little bit, though. So if I say 5 million people in Denver, well, not 5 million, let's say 3 million, 3 million people in Denver, then you're going to know by your common sense that I don't mean to the very last person. I mean to the nearest probably million. And you'll use some common sense about it. But normally when we write 500 milliliters, I will try to always remember to put the decimal in right there so that you know that I mean 3 significant figures. But there may be a time when you might have to ask, and that's okay. Go ahead and ask.